We set sail on this new sea because there is new knowledge to be gained and new rights to be won, and they must be won and used for the progress of all people. For space science has no conscience of its own. Whether it will become a force for good or ill depends on man. And only if the United States occupies a position of preeminence can we help decide whether this new ocean will be a sea of peace or a new terrifying theater of war. There is no strife, no prejudice, no national conflict in outer space as yet. Its hazards are hostile to us all. Its conquest deserves the best of all mankind, and its opportunity for peaceful cooperation may never come again. But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win. And therefore, as we set sail, we ask God's blessing on the most hazardous and dangerous and greatest adventure on which man has ever embarked.
Welcome back to the Halifax International Security Forum. I'm Jeanne Meserve. Space is critical to modern life, and particularly to modern militaries. Navigation, communication, reconnaissance, intelligence gathering, and more rely on satellites, making space a potential war zone. Recognizing its criticality, President Trump created the Space Force less than a year ago in December of 2019. It is the first new U.S. military branch since the Air Force was created in 1947. With us here today, the man in charge, General John Raymond, Chief of Space Operations of the United States Space Force. Thank you so much for being with us, General Raymond.
Oh, I can't thank you enough for allowing me to be here. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Great. The recent flight of the SpaceX Dragon to the International Space Station, just one illustration of the role of the commercial sector in space. With us to discuss the role of private enterprise in space defense is Jim Chilton, Senior Vice President of Boeing's Space and Launch Division. Jim Chilton, thank you also for being with us.
It's a privilege. Thank you for having me.
And also a reminder to our audience that if you registered for the Halifax Forum, you can submit questions. You got an email telling you how. We would love to hear from you, so please ask away. General Raymond, I would like to start this conversation with you. As mentioned, the Space Force is new, and already a group of progressives have written to President-elect Biden and suggested that it should be eliminated, saying it is expensive and it is unnecessary. Is it?
Well, first, let me just say again, thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm privileged to be here with Jim Chilton as well, a leader in this industry. You know, as your video pointed out, is at the beginning of this panel session, the U.S. has long recognized that space presents opportunities, both economic and scientific, for our nation. And it also, therefore, has been a domain of global competition. In fact, you know, we started out in space as a competition between us and the Soviet Union. And so we think it is absolutely critical to maintain shared access to space and freedom to maneuver in space. Those are vital national interests. Space fuels our American way of life. Space fuels, as you mentioned, our American way of war. And unfortunately, our adversaries or competitors have chosen this to be a domain of warfare and of weaponized space. And therefore, it is absolutely critical. It's essential that the Space Force continues to focus on being able to secure those vital national interests, not just for our nation, but for the globe.
Jim Chilton, the global space economy is estimated to be $424 billion. There are people who say that the intertwining of industry and nation states is driving the militarization of space. What's your response to that?
My response would be that what we're seeing in space, the nexus between commercial and military and science, is no different than what we saw in the oceans historically, and what you could even say happened in airways. And by that, I mean you have FAA and civil regulatory agencies and military flight operations that coexist, and their industries are mutually supportive. So I don't see it as driving militarization. I just see it as a natural evolution.
We're going to get a little bit of comment now from NATO about the native perspective on the importance of the military and space.
Well, communications is vital to all military operations. That's been true throughout history, but it's particularly true now. And space-based communications satellite capability allows us to command and control, allows us to organize. And so right at the heart of our command and control capability, as we have done since the Cold War, we have employed space for command and control. Communications has developed rapidly. Space-based communications, I know from my own operational experience, we have used it for many years, but it was quite difficult and it was often quite time-consuming. It's now much more routine. You mentioned GPS. Of course, we rely on GPS. In fact, the whole world relies on GPS for many day-to-day routine functions. In the military, we rely on GPS for timing, for navigation, for precision. And so it is very important that we understand that it isn't just about enabling now from space, it's about our ability to understand. So I'd include intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance as part of that. All those capabilities can be flown in space and near space. And there are different types of orbits, and there are different functions that can be better delivered at high Earth orbit. I'm sure you'll have subject matter experts on your panel to explain that, or medium Earth orbits or low Earth orbits. It depends on the type of capability you seek and you procure. So NATO understands this, and of course we continue to develop our capabilities.
General Raymond, simply put, are future wars going to be won and lost in space?
Well, let me just say, it is clear that space has become a warfighting domain, just like air, land, and sea, as I mentioned. And our primary focus of the United States Space Force is to be able to deter conflict from beginning or extending into space. I don't think anybody wins that war. We think we have a huge role in playing, not just to deter conflict in space, but if you can do that, you might be able to deter conflict across all the domains of warfare, and that's been our primary focus.
Jim Chilton, China has already been mentioned. They've been explicit about wanting to dominate space. They have landed a craft on the far side of the moon. They have talked about a lunar orbiter. They have tremendous ambitions. When it comes to technology, give us your viewpoint from industry. Have they caught up with the United States? Are they potentially surpassing us in some of the technologies necessary for space operations?
Well, I'll start by saying that China has become a very capable spacefaring nation. I think all of us can applaud their peaceful human space exploration and some of the science and technology advancements that are being made. So I'd like to get that on the table. I'm not able to give you a one-for-one, they have this technology militarily and we have that technology. That would be more of a military intelligence answer. But I would say if you look at their launch rates and if you look at their satellite deployments and the fact they do buy commercial satellites worldwide and they build their own, and they're very capable. So clearly a nation on the rise, and there are others that are becoming more and more capable in space.
General, go ahead, Jim. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. Go ahead.
Jim, so give us your assessment from the military side. Are they nipping at our heels, sticking just to the Chinese for the moment?
Yeah, well, first of all, let me just say we're the best in the world in space. And we're the best in the world in space because we have the best partners, we have the best industry, we have the best personnel, we have the most exquisite capabilities. But it's clear that China is moving very fast. They've gone from 0 to 60 really, really quick. And one of the reasons why we stood up and established the United States Space Force and its complementary warfighting command of United States Space Command is that we saw an opportunity to stay ahead of that threat. And so we are purposely building this force to be able to move at speed, to partner greater with our industry, with our allied partners, with the intelligence community, to make sure that we always remain the best in the world in space.
General Raymond, China has been very successful. We all know it's stealing intellectual property from American firms and from others. I'm wondering if partnering with industry opens up vulnerabilities.
I think there's always challenges and opportunities, but I think the opportunities of partnering with industry far out surpass the challenges we have. As I mentioned in my previous answer, we've got the world's best industry. They're the most innovative. They've got the best capabilities, and there's a way to do this without ceding any kind of operational advantage. And if you just look at what happened this past Sunday when NASA, commercial industry, and military space all partnered together to launch 4 astronauts from their surface to the International Space Station. It's a model of collaboration that we think the Space Force is going to be able to bring to even greater heights as we progress forward.
Jim, do you want to weigh in on the intellectual property issue and China's capabilities there?
I think everybody doing business globally knows that there are concerns all around the globe about, in many places you do business, China's an example. I would like to point out that the Department of Defense leadership has helped American industry quite a bit, U.S. industry, in giving guidelines for how we can set up our supply chains to be cyber secure, what technology should be protected and the like. So I think we're rapidly advancing on being able to operate in this environment.
And how would you evaluate the security of intellectual property at your company and other American companies right now?
I can only speak for my company, but I believe it's strong, and we're making it even stronger in our supply chain and partnerships.
General, the U.S. has cooperated with Russia in the past. They're partners on the space station for many years. They launched our astronauts up to the space station. But are they a significant and worrisome, frankly, competitor in the space domain?
Absolutely, they're a competitor. And they're a competitor. They've been a competitor since day one in space. As you mentioned, we've had a long history, even in the height of the Cold War, of being able to cooperate with Russia on civil space. But my focus is an armed service, and I'm focused on behaviors. And if I look at what both Russia and the previous conversation, what China is doing, it's really critical that we stay focused on making sure that we have access to space, freedom to maneuver in space. Our national security strategy of the United States says that both of those items are vital national interests, and that's our focus.
Could you be specific, General, about some of the things the Russians have been doing in space or related to space that are of concern?
Yeah, so absolutely. I've talked about this here publicly recently. Russia launched a satellite in close proximity to a United States satellite that was very concerning. If we have all seen those Russian nesting dolls, if you will, where there's a doll inside of a doll inside of another doll. Well, they had launched a satellite that had another satellite inside of it. And what we have seen in the past with that satellite is that they also then release a projectile that's designed to kinetically kill United States satellites. So that's one example. There's a whole full spectrum of threats that we're concerned about, from reversible jamming of GPS and communication satellites to directed energy weapons to, as we saw with China launching a missile from the ground and blowing up a satellite into 3,000 pieces of debris, and cyber threats. And so we're focused on that full spectrum of threats.
Russia is facing some budgetary problems. Do you think that's going to take some of the zing out of their space program, or do you think this is a priority for them?
Well, if you look at what they're doing, it's a priority, I think. But that's not my job to tell how they're going to do that in their country. My job is to make sure that however that materializes, that when you walk into a room and you turn the light switch, the lights are always on. Americans have always had the opportunity to utilize space without any hesitation. We want to make sure that when you turn on that proverbial light switch, that space is always there. That's our job. That's why we come to work today, each and every day.
Jim, can you talk about some of the other nations that have become spacefaring nations? It's a very long list.
It is a long and frankly impressive list. I think the nation of India is got great ambitions and has made terrific progress. I think we could look at their human space program and see them poised to make 5 years of tremendous progress. That, people sometimes overlook how capable the Europeans are in space because they're so collaborative, and it is often not touted as coming from one nation, but ESA and many of those nations. Australia recently formed a space agency comparable to NASA, and of course they're very capable militarily. I could go on, but in the last 5 years we've seen a real acceleration.
Most of the nations you've listed, I believe, are nations that are friendly to the United States. Are there others that are not so friendly that are also making strides in the space area?
Well, again, I'm not a military intelligence analyst. I think I would echo what General Raymond said. The world changes over long time scales. In our country, as an American industrialist, someone worked in a company that works globally but also supports the U.S. military, we feel like regardless of how the relationships change, we've got to have a U.S. Space Force supported by an industry that has them ready for whatever eventualities happen.
General Raymond, the UK just announced this week that they are forming a space command. Welcome news?
Absolutely. As Jim talked about, and as your earlier question mentioned, that there's a lot of activity in space as technology has enabled smaller satellites to be more relevant, and as commercial industry has helped lower the cost of launch, the barriers to entry have been reduced. We are working very hard, and one of the things I'm most proud of over the last several years, and specifically this year, is we really strengthened the relationships that we have with our partners. And UK is one of those. They just announced, as you said, stand up of a space command. France stood up a space command last year, shortly after the United States did. Japan has elevated space. Canada has elevated space in their service. We've got great partnerships, and I think those partnerships are going to deliver a spectacular advantage going forward. And it's an area that I'm most proud of. Not only do we share data back and forth, but we operate together, we train together, we exercise together, we war game together, and now we're actually building capabilities together. The Space Force has partnered with Norway, for example, to put payloads on a Norwegian satellite that saved us a significant amount of dollars and allowed us to get capability onto orbit faster. And we're doing this exact same thing with putting a hosted payload on a Japanese satellite. So we see great value in these partnerships going forward.
So these partnerships are important in countering the Chinese and the Russian threat, I'm sure. Are they also important because of the economics of operating in space? Absolutely.
I could not agree more with that statement. I think if you look at what's happening, and this is a really bad term to use when you're talking about the space domain, but there's an explosion of commercial opportunities in space. I mean, you just look at, today we track about in the 20,000s of objects in space, keeping the domain safe for all. Of those objects, a very small number are satellites, probably less than 3,000. The rest is debris. If you look at where this industry is going in the next few years, there could be up to 20,000 satellites, smaller distributed satellites in low Earth orbit. We see the economic advantage, and I think that partnership is really important to all the nations that we partner with, both military and economic.
We do have an audience question. Let's take that. What about countries who don't have a space program? What responsibilities do major powers have to protect and advance their ways of life? General, do you want to try and tackle that one?
The space capabilities that the Space Force operates, like, for example, the Global Positioning System, provides great advantage to the entire world free of charge. The smartphone that everybody in the world uses, that little blue dot, that represents the GPS dot, and it's way more than just the navigation signal of knowing where you are on the face of the world. It's the timing synchronization of this information age that's provided, again, as the backbone is provided by the United States Space Force. We take great responsibility in that. If you go onto the operations floor of the GPS Satellite Control Center, you will see a group of airmen that are committed to making sure that GPS remains that gold standard and is provided across the world without interruption.
Given the number of nation states and also now commercial operators that are active in space, many people have said that the current governance structures are totally inadequate for what's happening up there. General, could you talk about it specifically from the military point of view? And what sort of accords would you like to see potentially? And what are the prospects of them actually coming to fruition?
Yeah, so today there's the Outer Space Treaty of the 60s that basically says you can't put a weapons of mass destruction in space, and you can't put a military base on planets. Much other than that, it's the wild, wild west. And we really believe that there needs to be some norms of behavior on what is safe and responsible behavior in the space domain, especially when I just talked about the numbers of capabilities that are going to be in space are expanding significantly. We are working very closely with our partners, and I mentioned that in an earlier discussion, but we're working very closely with our partners, not just to operate and to train and exercise and develop capabilities, but also to develop what we call norms of behavior. What are those norms of behavior that responsible nations should follow? And the way we're doing that, again, is working with our partners and operating and demonstrating safe and professional behavior every single day.
Another viewer question: increasing the launch capacity for various space programs is being privatized. This viewer mentioned SpaceX, Virgin Galactic, etc. Do you see this as a problem, or is it an opportunity for smaller powers to get into the game?
Huge opportunity, huge opportunity. If you look at, just look at last Sunday. On Friday night, before the Sunday launch of the astronauts, we supported a launch off of our range at Cape Canaveral. 48 hours later, and the only reason why it was 48 hours later was some support equipment that was needed for the astronaut launch slipped it from Saturday to Sunday. So it would have been 24 hours. We did another launch. We have increased the capacity of our launch ranges significantly, and it has been based on innovation largely led by commercial industry. The SpaceX launch is an all autonomous launch, meaning it can, when it launches, it can sense whether it is flying a safe trajectory or not. And if it's not flying a safe trajectory, it will blow itself up. All the other rockets to date has to have a man in the loop to do that with large amounts of instrumentation. The entire commercial industry is going that way. By 2025, every rocket that's putting something into space off of one of our launch wings at either Vandenberg or Cape Canaveral will be all autonomous. That's going to reduce the cost of launch even further. It's going to allow us to increase the amount of launches that we do, and it's going to provide a significant advantage for our nation.
Jim, I want to ask you about innovation. As a private company, you innovate all the time. In your view, is the military innovating fast enough, or is that one reason exactly why a company like yours has to be involved with the military?
Well, I think there's two flavors. As you mentioned, there's a great benefit to a company like ours to serve the military, because there are technologies that they're going to need that really aren't going to be commercially, I'll call it, desirable on a short time horizon. And so if you can get some help from their labs and you can get an early customer buy or develop some technology, you may have a much better chance of bringing a commercial product. So there's clearly things the military does that helps us all. General Raymond mentioned GPS. I would also say that there's a place for industrial ingenuity and speed. Our colleagues at SpaceX are a good example of that, but you can see it everywhere. And private development will just be faster and can be just about as certain. I would mention, since you brought up launch, for the last 20 years in the US, most launch vehicles have been privately developed. The government may give you a stake in your development to make sure your design eventually serves where they see their needs, but they won't pay for the whole thing, and then they'll be a potential customer for you, and you'll have to negotiate orders. So anywhere where you can have dual use kind of technology, I think industrial development with the technology advancements we've seen, not just in the products, but in things like digital engineering and some of the crosswalk and sensors from the automotive industry. I think there is much more integration in space products than there has been, and there's certainly a place for industry ingenuity.
General, you want to weigh in? I saw you.
I would. I couldn't agree more with Jim again. If you look at what historically has been commercially viable in space, it's been large communication satellites, and it's been commercial launch vehicles. Now that technology has allowed smaller satellites, cheaper satellites to be more operationally relevant, and that the cost to launch those satellites has been reduced significantly, that opens up a competitive market for a whole host of different missions beyond just large communication satellites. So we see a significant partnership. And one of the things that we're working very closely on the Space Force side is to develop a model fused between a military service and a fused relationship with industry. We think we can do that very, very well based on the nature of the domain that we operate in and based on the way we are building this service from the ground up.
Fused relationship, what does that mean exactly?
I'm sorry.
I believe you used the term fused relationship.
Yeah, fused. But just look at Sunday's launch with NASA. That was that was civil space operating very seamlessly with commercial space, operating very seamlessly with military space, and they all came together to conduct an operation that everybody saw was hugely successful. We think there's other opportunities like that to develop those close partnerships between all of the sectors of space. And again, as we've been given this opportunity to build this service from the ground up with a blank piece of paper, one of the things that we're looking at is how do you do that different? And how do you do the human capital development different to be able to share people back and forth across all sectors of space to enable advantage?
And I want to talk about that personnel question some more in just a moment. But first, let me get back to innovation for just a second. The military is not renowned for moving fast. It has a very cumbersome procurement system and so forth. What are you doing? What changes are you making? What new approaches are you experimenting with to try and speed it up so you get what you need in a timely fashion?
Well, again, I think we're doing a lot of things. We've completely reorganized the National Security Space organizations. We're standing up a Space Systems Command that will unite multiple organizations, acquisition organizations together. We're pushing authorities down and delegating those down to the lowest level. In fact, we just within the last couple of months took what's called a head of contracting authority that was held at the Pentagon and moved that down to Los Angeles, where our acquisition experts are. We are empowering our people to make decisions and not have to bring those up to the highest level. When we reorganize space, we actually collapsed with the Space Force. We actually collapsed 2 layers of command and stripped out about 40% of our headquarters staff because, in our opinion, large organizations are slow and we want to be agile and fast. And the reason why we want to do that is because of the domain that we operate in and the challenges that we see with both Russia and China.
Jim, you mentioned that many of the technologies have dual purposes. They can be commercially used as well as militarily used. You know, I'm old enough to have been raised learning that Tang and Velcro are 2 of the big products from the whole space enterprise. What kinds of products now are being created for military application that actually will benefit the civilian sector?
Well, I would start the developing for the military and go into the civilian sector. I'll start with we designed and operate a program for the Space Force, the X-37B, where we run a series of experiments agreed to by government. We do some experiments for NASA. The actual vehicle has driven a whole level of technology advancement. What we're learning about is how to further advance reusable technology. And there's a set of experiments that fly on it, and each of those will help both the military and eventually commercial users. So in that domain, you can see specific niche technologies getting a chance to fly and get tested, and then they can walk off into commercial. I would also point out that it isn't just the products that go fly that create the commercial opportunity. Some of the ways you design the digital environments that you can rapidly advance in a government environment, those pay off. Although I would say and I would like to point out, technologies can go both ways. You know, I'll give kudos to one of General Raymond's leaders, John Thompson at the Space and Missile Center. We have built many wideband global satellite communication satellites for mostly dedicated military use. And there are cases where our commercial satellite technology is useful on those. Recently, we had a case where the commercial supply chain really wasn't going to fit the government procurement system, but we had been asked, bring it forward if you think it could help us so we could find a way. And I would tell you the Space and Missile Center and General Thompson, they were as good as their word, as we brought that in. So we learned how to get commercial technology into the right environment for the military as well.
We have another viewer question. Currently, the UN Outer Space Treaty states that exploration shall be carried out for the benefit and in the interests of all countries. With the vast wealth potential of space, realistically, how long will it be before a country like China makes a claim of sovereignty? General?
Well, I think the Outer Space Treaty is clear. It says that nobody has sovereignty over space. Again, we come to work every day to make sure that the space domain stays free, stays open, that it's accessible, that it is safe, and we provide space traffic control for the world. We're transparent with our data sharing. We will notify China that one of their satellites is about to potentially collide with a piece of debris. I mean, we want to keep this domain safe for all, and nobody has a sovereignty claim. We all need to be responsible and professional actors in this domain for the goodness of the whole globe.
Another viewer question, this one for you, General Raymond. How challenging was it to stand up the U.S. Space Force from scratch?
It's been great. What a heck of an opportunity to be able to have an opportunity to build something. My whole career has been in space. I am really, really privileged to lead an incredible group of people. We come to work every day energized to make a difference. And what I've told this team is we have a great opportunity to, again, custom build this service for the space domain. It doesn't need to look like all the other services. It's going to be small. It's going to be agile. It's going to be a very high-tech service. And so we have a huge opportunity, and I'll tell you, the excitement has never been higher. We have people knocking on our doors wanting to come into the Space Force. In fact, we have way more people wanting to come in than we can take. I'm really pleased with that, with the progress we've made in just 11 months. Next month is our first year, 1 year birthday, if you will, on the 20th of December. The progress we have made has been incredible, and I give all the credit to the people that I'm privileged to lead.
Do the people who are knocking on your door to come into the Space Force have the skills you need? Do you have the engineers, the mathematicians, the big strategic thinkers that you need? Or because this is a relatively new field and because STEM education in the U.S. in particular is problematic, are you finding it difficult to find the right kind of people?
Not finding it difficult at all. I think we've got incredible talent across our nation. We've got a lot of incredible talent, again, knocking on our door. If you look at the Air Force Academy, for example, last year, we had 86 cadets directly commissioned into the United States Space Force. And if you look at the 86, we got really top tier parts of that class. I've been to several different universities around the country, and every university that I talk to tells me that because of all the activity that's happening in all the sectors of space, NASA going back to the moon by 2024, commercial industry with all the innovation that we see, and with the national security space, with the Space Force, with all of that, we see applications for space-related STEM courses on the rise. And so I really believe this time that we see today across our nation is going to pay us huge advantage 10 years from now, 15 years from now, because of the excitement that is happening in the space domain today.
Jim Chilton, do you have the same perspective on the talent problem, or do you see deficits?
Well, as an industrial leader, I'm always looking to increase talent. So it is critical that we continue to promote STEM at very early ages. Our experience inside Boeing is that talking about space, bringing space type educational curricula to kids gets their excitement up very high relative to others. We don't have any trouble recruiting into our space and launch business. In fact, we attract a lot of people from other parts of the business. So first, I would say that space is a place you can attract the talent. If space is going to grow in the way we all aspire for it to, as you talked about in your opening, Jeanne, I think we need to see the educational establishment, the volume of people that we get in STEM with STEM, some kind of STEM training. It doesn't always have to be a PhD or a degree. I think there's plenty of room to increase the output.
We have another question. China provides an attractive option for smaller countries, several African countries as an example, to improve their communication capabilities. What can allies do to be competitive and provide capabilities with less risk to privacy? Jim, you want to handle that?
I'll take the first cut and then see if General Raymond would like to weigh in. First off, in places like Africa and underserved, there is pretty healthy competition to provide communication service. We build communication satellites for companies like Viasat and SES, and they are in those markets and trying to make civilian communications and broadband access available. We also see them competing for rural areas of North America. So in the civil domain, we see other options. In the military communications domain, that clearly goes through government, and I would ask General Raymond to talk more about that if he's inclined.
I would just say I'd put my money on U.S. industry every day. We're the best industry in the world. We've got the best capabilities in the world, got the most innovative industries in the world, and I don't have any concern at all that our industries won't be able to compete with competitors around the globe. That's what we do best. And if you look at what's going on in the space industry today, you have to look no further than the United States.
Another question. What can democratic countries do to prevent China's Belt and Road Initiative from going where no regime has gone before? Any thoughts? Belt and Road is largely infrastructure on the ground as I know it, but have they got tentacles into the space arena as well?
I absolutely think that China's Belt and Road Initiative extends into space. And so again, that's one of the reasons why it's important that we compete. If you look at the National Defense Strategy, our National Defense Strategy talks about competing, deterring, and winning. And again, this Space Force, the reason why it's so critical is we need to be able to compete, we need to be able to deter conflict, and we need to be able to win as we can today. If God forbid deterrence were to fail. And I think clearly the One Belt, One Road Initiative extends into space as well.
General, a question about funding. COVID is stressing and straining the federal budget. The situation is probably going to get worse. Does that mean you're going to have less money?
I think, obviously the nation has a lot of priorities. And if you look at, like we always do, we have to balance, the nation has to balance the full weight of all the different funding priorities that are out there. I will tell you on the Space Force side, one of the things that we are very proud of is that the work that we're doing, again, in partnership and in developing this service from the ground up and being able to take advantage of technology that is reducing costs, we think we're going to move out in a direction that's going to actually save some dollars going forward.
Jim, space is military, it's commercial, it's strategic, it's scientific. Is it possible to disentangle those things from one another?
Well, in my view, it's not entirely possible. I'll use technology as an example. As technologies advance, they become useful to use for more scientific discovery, or they may come from the discovery. As they're commercially applied, they can become attractive for military missions. So in human endeavors, I don't think as a matter of policy they could ever be entirely disentangled, nor do I think that's desirable as someone who wants to see that space economy expand. So I would tend to think of it more like oceans, or as commercial aviation and aviation developed in the last century. You have very complicated networks of airways now, and you have rules in use and the law of the sea in place, and all of that continues to advance technologically, economically, and it gets used in different ways militarily. And so the idea of disentangling it, I think, is not realistic or probably even desirable.
General, what capabilities do you want? What don't you have that you'd like to have, that you'd like to see Jim and perhaps other people in the private sector help you with?
I think we're really focusing on making sure that we have the domain awareness capabilities that we need. Space is a very vast and large domain. The area of responsibility that U.S. Space Command has is 100 kilometers above the Earth's surface and higher. And so being able to have a understanding of what's going on in that domain at incredibly fast speeds. Objects in space travel 17,500 miles an hour just to be able to remain in space. And so that's one of them. Having the ability to command and control not just space capabilities, but command and control capabilities in all domain, to be able to share data broadly from all domain, to be able to connect sensors to shooters in all domain, being able to develop and capitalize on autonomy, like I talked about just on the launch side. All of those things are things that we're focused on.
Jim, the General alluded to space debris, a huge problem. Is Boeing working at all in that realm to try and manage that problem?
We are, and we're working in a few domains. One is the technologies on our space platforms. We want to be debris free. We want to be able to avoid debris. We also are engaging in more meaningful ways with our regulatory bodies, where we get the privilege of making inputs. They're the deciders. We are pushing for, if you think of low Earth orbit, where humans have lived continuously now for 20 years on the International Space Station, it's not a place you want to see a lot of debris or short notice debris. So as economics of many large LEO constellations emerge, the rules will need to be well defined, and our designs will have to be highly reliable to follow those rules. So we're kind of across the spectrum working on that, both in our human and our satellite area, and we're engaging with governments to try to make that good for everybody.
General, I see your lips moving. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. We're all getting more fluent in Zoom or these types of calls as we go forward. But I would just pile on a little bit. One of the ways to mitigate the debris challenge, just as Jim said, is not to create debris in the first place. And so acting responsibly, not shooting missiles to blow up satellites, making sure that two satellites don't collide and cause debris. Doing the engineering standards that when you do launch, that pieces of debris don't come off the launch vehicle, or that when satellites near the end of the life, that they don't break into pieces. So we've done a lot of work in the United States and with our partners to help solve that by not creating it in the first place.
General, are you also working on offensive capabilities?
Our focus is to protect and defend the capabilities that we have on orbit, to make sure that our joint and coalition partners have the capabilities that they need. We're working very hard on norms of behavior. We're working very closely with our allies to develop those partnerships to deter. We're working very closely in developing technology or tactics, techniques, and procedures to be able to protect and defend. But I think it's also important to know we're an armed service, and that if you look at the U.S. Space Command mission statement, it says we'll conduct offensive and defensive operations. And we're not NASA. We need to make sure that, again, our number one priority is to protect and defend and to deter conflict from beginning or extending into space. And we're going to do that from a position of strength. Well,
isn't one of the tools of deterrence having an offensive capability?
I think the tools of deterrence are to help change the calculus of an adversary. One of the things that we're really focusing on is trying to deny benefits and impose costs, just like all other areas of deterrence. And we think that space is a critical enabler to the broader deterrence discussion. If you look at what the National Security Strategy says, if anybody, and I'm paraphrasing here, but tries to mess with our ability to have assured access to space or freedom of maneuver in space, we will respond at a place, time, domain, and manner of our choosing. So it's not just space for space sake. It's rolled into the broader deterrence conversation.
General, some observers have said that you have to be aggressive in charting a path forward for the Space Force. What is that path?
Yeah, so I think we are being aggressive. One of the things that I tell our folks in the Space Force is that we're going to be bold. I think we've been given a great opportunity with the National Defense Authorization Act, again, to create this service from the ground up. I also have said that when we get done with this and we build this service, that others should be looking over our shoulders saying, boy, I wish I had what they had, because we have done this, again, from the ground up, purposely built for space. It's being able to develop our human capital different. It's being able to have different methods of acquisition. It's capitalizing on digital engineering to be able to move at speed and at a reduced cost. It's developing our partnerships with our allies. It's developing our operators to operate in a contested domain. It's all of that, and we are moving at incredible speed. And if we don't, then we've missed a huge opportunity.
And we have to leave it there. General John Raymond of the U.S. Space Force and Jim Chilton of Boeing, thank you both for joining us today for this conversation. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
And on behalf of the forum, we'd like to thank Boeing for their support as a Club HFX member.
Well, thank you so much for tuning in today, which is day 2 of Halifax International Security Forum. We'll be back tomorrow for our final day, so join us then.